Hey, everybody. Hey, Sandor. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Cool. So really quick, we'll just do some brief introductions and then would love to dive into the topic. So I'm Troy Good. I'm the founder and CEO of Courier. We're a communication API platform company. And joining me today is Sandor Nyako. Sandor, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, Troy. My name is Sandor. I'm a director of engineering at LinkedIn. I support a team that we call the Notify team. This team consists of a more product-facing part, which owns certain experiences on the notifications tab, and it consists of a other team which we call the comms platform. And this is the platform for the entire company, which kind of deals with notification, push, email, SMS, and certain associated systems and logic and AI infrastructure. And part of this team, the air traffic controller, which kind of the brain of this whole communications platform.
Very cool. And I know, we had the opportunity to meet and just shortly after I started the company, and I really appreciated you giving me the time then and the time now. And air traffic controller was really the thing I was most excited to meet you about. I don't even know if I realized until now that that's only one part of the broader Notify organization. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the history of air traffic controller. So maybe we start there, and then maybe we could spend a few minutes as well talking about what there is beyond air traffic controller here.
Yes. So let me go back in time, maybe 8 years. Okay. At that time, LinkedIn was a desktop-heavy app, and there was less reliance on the mobile part. So email was kind of the natural form to engage users. And the first thing was built in this space was just an email gateway where different business units and teams within LinkedIn could send their emails. And it was kind of a free-for-all. So it ended up being abused, the email channel, because if you look at business units in isolation, they are going to optimize for their metric, which is going to maximizing volume, essentially. But overall, that resulted in large amount of email volume sent to users in irregular times. Like maybe Monday morning, you opened your email client and you saw like 5 emails from LinkedIn, each email trying to ask you to do something. Okay. So the first, and this is kind of a nice abstract constant optimization problem if you look at it that way. Like you have a number of email campaigns and you want to figure out which days they should be sent. If you want to be really hairy here, you want to figure out which hour they need to be sent. Okay. And you want to kind of minimize volume and maximize the engagement you are getting out of it. So the first new piece was put in place here is kind of an offline badge job, which took some configuration file in with the campaign names, which days I want to send this, and then outputted a list for every day that, hey, this member should receive this campaign, another member should receive this campaign. Okay. And I think many companies have this type of system in place, and then they kind of even LinkedIn manually try to adjust and kind of improve this setup. So this doesn't scale beyond 10 campaigns, probably. Like the number of campaigns started to grow. There were like 20, 30, whatever campaigns, just manually figuring out that which campaign should be sent on which day. It doesn't scale. So the second kind of layer which was put into place is a more fine-grained approach, which was on top of this, introduced an AI model, which kind of was trained on how users interacted with different campaigns. Like imagine an AI model is being trained on certain data, certain features, and then every day it outputted which campaigns should be dropped. Okay. So we are kind of getting closer for more kind of a formulated constant optimization and problem. And then that, we call it the volume optimization model. That model helped kind of reducing volume by cutting it to maybe half or even more. And then also like kind of finding the campaigns automatically, which kind of users better engage with. Okay? So I would say this was the first rudimentary version of trying to solve this central decision-making problem, specifically in the email world. Okay. Now, maybe 5 years ago, I don't know the exact time frame here, mobile kind of started to catch up. Like LinkedIn had this mobile-first strategy when there was a lot of investment into mobile. Now that introduced an additional complexity into the space, which is the multi-channel. Okay, so there was a push and badging team created, which focused on engaging members through push and badging on the mobile app. And there was a notification team created, which tried to engage members through notifications. So, and then, so in this space, we had a kind of email team, push and badging team, notification team in different parts of the company who are trying to achieve like roughly the same goal. Okay.
Right.
And then if there was an internal team who wanted to roll out their communication strategy, they went talking to these teams in separation and kind of wired together a logic in their own system. Like first I should send a push, then I try to send a badge. So that logic, or that setup, I mean, there are multiple problems there. One, there is a productivity problem. If your company is large, the productivity is very low in this space because people are just hitting these prioritization bumps and overall the amount of communication needed is very large. The second thing, there's a member experience problem because these setups are inherently buggy. Okay, there is race conditions. What goes first? What if there is a failure? What if I sent like 3 pushes and then am I going to send 10 more? So there are like member facing problems. And maybe the third big problem that these setups are very hard to evolve. So you can put AI on top of this because like which team is going to own the AI? Where do you put it?
Sure.
So, and at that time, the necessity emerged to introduce the air traffic controller system, which is essentially an orchestration layer between communication channels and teams who want to send a communication. And I pause here. I let you to kind of ask questions if you want.
Yeah, that's great. And by the way, for folks watching, if you have questions, please drop them into the LinkedIn Live comments or YouTube, Twitch, wherever you happen to be watching it right now. We'll revisit some of those towards the end. Sandor, you know, when I think about that problem, LinkedIn obviously, even by 2005, 2008, when this began, was already a fairly large company. What existed out of curiosity? So before that, you mentioned there was kind of different solutions kind of embedded in different parts of the organization. So was that just in the kind of core platform engineering teams, or was this, you know, you mentioned campaigns, was some of this owned by marketing? Was, you know, if there's a growth organization, was some of it owned, you know, where did this live before? And also kind of follow up, where does ATC sit today? Like, where does this Notify team sit?
So I think this is a natural evolution of companies as they grow, that initially all companies focus on their product, right? If your product is technology, then you develop technology. If your product is a social networking website, then you put all resources initially into developing that website and whatever the user wants, right? And then as companies scale and grow, there are additional layers emerged, like infrastructure. Then there is like some companies have 2 layers of infrastructure. There is like a deep infrastructure which deals with databases, data transportation, and there is an application infrastructure. And then on top of that, there is application. So at that time, LinkedIn was at the kind of a stage where there was an infrastructure team and applications. And then the communication channels were, the control over communication channels were put into application teams. Because, for example, mostly on the growth team, actually, because the use of the comms was to drive growth. So let's put it in the growth team. Okay, so that was the thinking. Later on, the comms platform team was formulated. It's still part of the growth organization, by the way, the comms platform. But at this point, it serves the entire company. So that there was a necessity to kind of what we call platformize this functionality, because it's the same across the entire company.
Got it.
So I think if you go to early startups, these functions will still sit somewhere in the growth team, and then as they grow, probably they are gonna take the same journey as LinkedIn.
That makes sense. And you know, thinking about some of the history of what you mentioned, I know you mentioned some of the initial kind of functionality you built out was really around kind of dealing with campaign volume. And I would assume that really what we're talking about here are kind of engagement campaigns that would typically be driven by a growth organization. So in and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just thinking, I'm obviously a LinkedIn user, as is probably everybody watching this. So I've been the recipient of a bunch of these messages. So I would imagine, I get the a message, hey, a bunch of people are checking out your profile, right? Which drives me to come back and feel good about myself and come check it out to see who's checking me out. Like, I would imagine that would be probably a campaign in your organization, right?
So business-wise, I see there are multiple categories of communications, depending on what is the business goal you want to achieve, right?
Yep.
There are engagement type of campaigns, but we currently kind of, or at this stage of the company, they mostly go through the email channel, right? We don't want to send like advertisements or anything on the notification tab. So they mostly go to email. These are usually large volume campaigns, which are digest time. But there are also transactional notifications, which like someone like your post. I think every social networking site has that type of notification, or someone commented on your post. So this is this also drives engagement, but it's also a signal for you, like if you are a content creator, that you can engage with your content. Okay. And there is an entirely third setup of notifications and emails, which are not used by the LinkedIn, the social networking side, but LinkedIn enterprise application. So if you are using the LinkedIn recruiter application, there are certain notifications associated with that, like someone applied to your job advertisement, but this doesn't drive engagement. This is like more like a workflow management. So there are, depending on what is your goal with the or comms, you need to think about like what is the usage pattern there.
That makes sense. And even when we look at transactional, I would imagine we could probably subdivide that a bit, right? Because we've got, transactional messages like I pay for LinkedIn Premium, I get a receipt from time to time, right? That would be kind of one, account related notification, right? Which tend to be lower frequency, but really high urgency, right? Then I think about, let's say you send me a message on LinkedIn's, chat system, right? That's a little bit different than somebody leaving a comment, right? Comments, I might want to have you aggregate those, right? And, send me a batch where maybe I want to know immediately if somebody drops me a message, but then again, maybe if it's an in-mail, might want a digest of those as well. So I think there's quite a bit of complexity even on the transactional side here, right?
Yes. So usually transactional, we put them into tiers, and different tiers have different SLAs. So yes, you are right. My billing statement might not have a high SLA, but it shouldn't be lost. So like the reliability is different there than, let's say, the example, someone like your post, right? Messaging, similar. Messaging needs to be faster. Someone like your post needs to be, it's okay to be slower. So yeah, these are different tiers, and kind of ATC over time develop different functionalities which serve these different use cases.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And some of, I imagine, actually, before I get to that, one of the things I wanted to mention is you mentioned a few different channels that LinkedIn leverages, and if I would guess, but I don't know for sure, but I would guess a lot of folks, when they think about LinkedIn, and if you were to ask them, hey, what channels does LinkedIn use to communicate with me? I bet a lot of folks would say mobile push, right? Because I think there's a lot of engagement with the mobile app. Everybody's going to see some emails, so they'd probably think about emails. Some people don't realize in-app is a communication channel, but if they thought about it, they'd probably realize that. But I know that you also have a couple other channels. At the very least, there's desktop push, I think, for certain use cases, and I think you use SMS as well. Is that right?
Yeah. So when we built ATC, our goal was to be channel agnostic. So ATC doesn't know the details how to deliver an SMS. It knows how to talk to the system which delivers the SMS. Okay, that was the one of the architecture kind of requirement or paradigm. Okay.
Right.
And that answers partially your question, what else is in the comms team? So there is a system which knows how to deliver an SMS. There is a system which knows how to deliver a push, etc. So those are like, there is very domain specific logic there. So I think the four main channels is email, obviously. We consider notification, in-app notification as a channel, because you deliver enough notification, there is a badge, it's a
Absolutely.
legitimate channel. Push is a channel and SMS is a channel. Outside this is SMS is historically the importance changed over time. Like in the US, SMS is not a thing anymore. In China, it's a big thing. So SMS is, I would say, a niche, country-specific channel. Also, it's heavily regulated legally. So I think our SMS volume is pretty small right now.
Sure, yeah. I remember when we first met, I was surprised SMS was even a channel, because I've never received an SMS from LinkedIn, but that makes sense that it would be, the channels should be tailored to each individual, obviously, but what that tailoring looks like can depend on location and culture and other factors.
It's habitual, right? It's just certain countries have different habits of using different communication channels. Again, for some reason, China has a much bigger SMS use than the US as of today. And if I go back in history, that was probably different.
One quick question about SMS before we move on, but it's just something that I thought I'd bring up, since I remember being wowed by it when we first met, is at the time, and I don't know if this is still true, but at the time, and obviously you don't have to name names, but I recall that you were using multiple SMS providers under the hood, right?
Yeah.
So like most companies, I would presume you're still not going directly to the telecommunications carriers, right?
Yeah.
And I would assume also for email, you're probably using some sort of service provider there as well.
Yeah,
but you're using multiple providers, I believe.
No, so I'm not familiar as of today the nitty-gritty details, but at some point in time, a given provider could deliver SMS in a given region for a different price. Now, again, we are getting back to a constraint optimization problem that when you have a high volume SMS, which you send all over the world, you want to pick the best provider for that region for your price. So that was the reason. Now, we don't do that anymore. We kind of cut back because we don't need that optimization anymore. We don't send that many SMS.
Got it. I see. Okay. What about for other channels? Obviously for mobile push, right? There's the providers are essentially the platform providers, right? There's Apple and there's Google. But when we think about email, for example, I've talked to other teams that might have multiple providers, not necessarily for cost optimization, the way you had for SMS in the past, but for things like failover. Is that something that ATC tackles, or maybe some of the other communication platform teams tackle?
So it's independent of ATC. Okay, in ATC we want to simplify the word to the decision that we want to send an email.
Got it.
That's the decision ATC makes. How that email will get delivered to the different piping mechanisms, that's a separate consideration. I can explain what this is not handled by our team, so I don't know the exact details, but there is a thing of email reputation. So yes, you want to somehow send out that email from LinkedIn, and for that you need a provider. One, you need multiple providers because of just what you said, diversification, and if something fails. But the other thing, there is a reputation. So if you send too many emails to one provider, they're gonna mark you as a spammer, and you want to balance there. And also there is a country-specific angle here again, that in some countries, email is regulated more than in other countries, and the volume which is good in the US, it might not be good in China. So for example, you need to implement rules for different countries if you are operating worldwide in the email space.
Right. So, ATC is kind of looking at me as a user of LinkedIn, and it's making some decisions about which notifications I should or shouldn't receive based upon kind of volume, right? I like to think of the traffic cop analogy, right? Only let a few cars through the intersection at any given time. But it's not just about me as an individual, as my preferences, as my history, but it's also the context of where I'm at. What are the laws and regulations of the country I'm in?
Yeah, so ATC does not work into that, or does not look into that. That would be too complex. I think what the examples I'm bringing up are more like on the niche. Okay, there's some imperfection there, but ATC uses AI, and our hope that AI will learn those things over time if we put enough signals into AI. Like it's a bit of above a certain complexity, trying to hard code everything is gonna fail. It's gonna be very difficult to look into every single angle in every system, what decision needs to be made. So we are kind of moved to a world where we have AI who is gonna learn some of these things over time.
Got it. And that I believe includes kind of deciding when to aggregate messages together, right, into what often is called a batch or a digest. There's been certain times in Courier's life where I've received a lot more LinkedIn invites on a certain day than other times, right? Yeah. And I've seen that automatically LinkedIn will, instead of sending me an individual notification for each of those, it'll say, hey, you received a bunch of invites. Is that powered by AI, or is that more programmatic?
So again, I don't know if as of today, I think at some point it was powered by AI that you have an individual threshold of how many individual notifications you are going to tolerate, right? Everyone has a cognitive bandwidth of and then the way aggregation works, that you receive X notification over some Y time, and after that we are going to put it into an email. We're not sending you more, and then you are going to exit this window at some point if you don't receive. Now this window size and the number of notification, there was an AI model in place which kind of inputted this in every week or every month. I don't know the cadence, and ATC used that number. The reason I'm speaking about this in past term, because we found that the impact there kind of diminished over time, and just putting here a fixed number was almost sufficient enough. Most of the users. I don't know why that happened. Maybe the usage pattern changed on the user side, that the word is more instant now. You look instantly on your phone, right, if something happens. This is more like a few years ago. But yeah, you can use AI if you want to kind of to calibrate these numbers.
Got it. Okay. So regardless of whether it's AI or hard-coded limits, you've got this window essentially of determining, how much is too much for the user. And then kind of taking the rest and putting it into some sort of digest. But I seem to remember, one of the things that we've talked about before is guardrails, right? Because there's that's kind of protecting your user from your own organization, because you just have a lot of different teams with, good goals, but those good goals could result in just a lot of messages going out, right? But then we've also got, and we've all seen this from time to time, some loop somewhere goes crazy, right? And you get a ton of emails or a ton of push messages from some app that was clearly not just, okay, well, too many people were sending messages at the same time. It was the system was broken. And I think that's part of what ATC does as well, right? Is provide guardrails just to kind of protect from accidental sending.
Yeah, let me break this down to multiple layers, right?
Yeah.
There are what are called the last resort guardrails. Which are mechanisms which are very rudimentary thing that, hey, this user cannot receive more than 50 pushes a day. I just give you an example. Those type of last mile guardrails are in that system. So we are kind of, we don't want that accident to happen.
Right.
Now there are other kind of more soft guardrails in place. One is the onboarding process. Like during the onboarding process, we look at the use case, like if you want to send out the test email, if you really want to send it out, you can, but you have to go to multiple reviews like to get into production. Or we look at the look of the email, like the verbiage. So that is another guardrail of kind of a design guardrail. So because it has a big brand impact. The third type of guardrail I want to talk about, when we optimize AI models, one of the limit for them is unsubscribe for email or this notification disable. So if the AI model tries to maximize engagement and minimize the unsubscribe and disable, so it's kind of gets baked into the AI decision making. So there are multiple places we use guardrails. Maybe a fourth example where every time something is rammed into production, right? We do an A/B test and we look at those metrics. So if a new change like results in a jump in email bounces or email unsubscribe or notification disable, there's a certain look into the trade-off there, because there was some upside and downside in the chain. So there are guardrails are multiple places in the process and systems.
Okay, that makes sense. And you mentioned kind of as part of that, some of it is based upon user preferences, right? And I think this is another thing that I think LinkedIn does well, especially I certainly on the consumer side, but also I would say even especially in kind of Sales Navigator. One of the things I've noticed is, I can get a notification and I can say, hey, send me less alerts like this, right? I might be interested in some alerts and not in others, and I might say, hey, I don't necessarily want to hear as much about this company anymore or this kind of activity. So there's actually quite a bit of customization for me as an end user of both the consumer side and the business side of giving you kind of preference data around what I do and what don't receive. I assume that is ATC what's kind of capturing all that and deciding.
So for Sales Navigator, no, they have their own AI team, but
Got it.
The main LinkedIn app doesn't have this functionality. Okay, this is implemented in the Sales Navigator side. I think the reason because their user base is much smaller, and they are kind of paying for the product, and then they have that customization there.
Got it.
For implementing this customization on large scale and keeping tab of personal preferences on the main LinkedIn app, it might be too much of kind of data crunching and also kind of in the product side. So we don't have that in the main LinkedIn app. We took so I don't think the personal what I'm trying to say, the personalization in the main LinkedIn app is not specific to a user. Okay, it's more like a group of users.
Makes sense. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Something interesting from that is and we've joked before about how, from my perspective, ATC is huge. Like the team that you guys have is quite large from my perspective. From the perspective of really large organizations, it's sizable, but maybe not as big as from my point of view. I do think it's interesting that even at your scale, at that size, like as much as you all have done to centralize notifications, it's still centralizing it really for one of the experiences, right? You still have investment in what I would consider notifications within other product lines as well. Maybe even I don't know does ATC kind of handle all of the marketing messaging as well, or is there marketing automation that sits separate from ATC?
So we are moving the marketing automation into ATC.
Got it.
Okay, so currently it's a separate org, and then one thing that there is a kind of trade-off between centralization and decentralization, because decentralized teams can move faster and can specialize their own goals. Why, if you kind of have a big central org, then you are always constrained by the resources of the big central org, the focus of that big central org. So there's nothing wrong with like having decentralized teams taking care of their own business goals. I think what we want to put in ATC and the comms platform is what can be shared by multiple orgs, right? Just developing something for one org, it's from a platform side, it doesn't make a good investment case in our end. So we are moving some of the marketing cases into ATC, but not all of them, because some of them requires heavy specialization and targeting a very specific audience.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Something, we talked a bit about the what I believe you might internally call filters, kind of at the tail end. Those are the guardrails and ways to prevent users from receiving notifications when maybe they shouldn't. That's kind of at the front end, or I mean at the tail end of the process, as I understand it. And then at the front end of the process, right, you're kind of fetching a bunch of data about the user to help kind of decide what's going on, then deciding based upon that data which channel this user should receive this notification on, right? So we already mentioned you've got your mobile push, you've got your in-app push, you've got email, and then in certain territories you might have things like SMS. If we just simplify it down to the kind of the channel, the 3 or 4 primary channels, when ATC is kind of deciding whether to deliver that notification to me via mobile push or in-app push or email. How does it decide that?
Sure. So maybe I can explain what inputs goes into the decision, and then let's go from there. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the inputs is the user settings. Okay. If the user say that I don't want to, you can go to the main LinkedIn app and say I don't want to receive push, then you are not going to receive a push, or you don't want to receive a badge, then we make decision accordingly. Okay, that limits the choices. So there is logic for that in ATC. It's a multi-stage process actually in ATC to decide about the channel.
Okay.
The other input is the user's history. Right, the ATC looks at the user, and ATC is a stream processing system which has a local state, a local store, where it can look back to the user's history. I don't know how many days we maintain currently, but if you already received like above your aggregation limit, then you don't get a push, you get an email. Okay. There is a third input, and these inputs are not used in every single case, right? There is a configuration when we want to. The third input is what AI says. Okay. So every notification is scored, that there is an AI score for it, and there are thresholds, right? We have a hierarchy of channels. Okay. So push is considered a more valuable than simple batch channel, and then based on the score, we can make a channel decision. So these are the main inputs which go into channel selection. Now, ATC is a pluggable system. So you can come in and write your own channel selection algorithm, which very rarely teams do because they have some type of logic which needs that. But the way we architected ATC, that we consider this, there is a pipeline, right? You can think about it as a pipeline. Channel selection is a stage of this pipeline, and you can plug in your own model if you want to.
Got it. So while we're talking about the kind of front side of this, you've got, gosh, I don't know how many thousands of engineers at LinkedIn. How many? Obviously not all on ATC, but how many engineers are directly using ATC, right? Like how many? Is it kind of everybody at LinkedIn can potentially send a message through ATC, or is it really there's a few groups within other parts of the kind of platform or application teams that use ATC, like?
No, yeah. So there are no thousands of engineers of ATC, of course, on ATC, of course. It's a platform. So we consider ourselves as a platform team, and then the way we build this up is to the outside world. We are not the ATC team. It's the comms platform. There is an intake path where you can start engaging. There is an onboarding process. Okay, you can start engaging. You go to onboarding stages. And there is another afterlife of the use case, which we are supporting through Slack channels, email. So there is a standard way to engage with our team. What we are trying to accomplish and move forward to, and we are not there perfectly, that external teams don't need to know the details of like which system does which within our domain, but they can kind of interact with us as a black box. We are not there yet. If you need to debug something, you unfortunately need to understand the details. But we are aiming to do this platform team, which kind of under the hood kind of swallows the complexity of things. And like if I'm an application engineer and I want to use the platform, I don't want to ramp up on all the complexity which goes into the platform. Otherwise, the leverage goes down on the platform. So that's what we are aiming for.
Got it. So in the future, you'll have an internal API or SDK or something like that a developer could use.
We already have that. I think the main challenge now is just how much complexity that comes through that external API and how much you need to understand the details of the systems which implement that API.
Yeah, absolutely. No, having developed many APIs, it's hard to think about it from the API consumer's perspective when you're the one building the internal side of it. That's part of the tricky part there.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the other things that I think ATC does, and I think this plays into what you used to call the five rights, I believe, and I don't know if that's still Yeah.
Can I list the five?
Yeah,
Okay,
please
so I
do.
need to recall the 5 rights. Okay, write message, write time, write member. Right. Actually, I can't recall the remaining two rights. This is from actually some marketing book. I don't think it was right frequency. That's the 4th right. Actually,
There you go.
I know the 5th right. Sorry
Right
about
channel.
that.
Right channel.
It's right channel. Right channel. Yeah, you're right. So yes, I think that's an amazing way to define what ATC tries to accomplish. Okay, I didn't invent this. I think it's coming from someone from product or marketing, but it's an amazing statement which is still true. That's probably one of the best vision statements I ever heard. So yes.
Awesome. One of the the rights there is the right message, and I know you've mentioned that. I think perhaps it's the AI model, or maybe it's just manually as part of onboarding. One of the things you look at is the message itself. One of the things that you and I talked about before, and I'd be curious to know what, if anything, has changed here, is at the time, a couple of years ago, the message itself was heavily built by the application developer, right? So not really fully managed by the ATC team. And obviously you've got a few different channels. You can't send, the message that I would get from LinkedIn about a billing notification or an account management notification via email is formatted differently than a mobile push or an in-app push, right? What kind of infrastructure is there? If I'm an application developer at LinkedIn, I want to send a message, and I want this message to potentially be able to support all the main channels, right? Potentially be able to be routed to in-app, push with a badge, or mobile push, or perhaps email. Do I have to build 3 separate messages?
I think, let me give you, I think there are 2. If I parse your question well, you are asking 2 different things. Okay, let me explain the first one. Okay, the right message. What right message means is not that ATC is gonna compose a message for you magically, right? Right? Right. It means that from all the potential messages you give us, we are gonna select the right one. Okay, so you need to give us upfront your messages, and that's. I give you an example. You send 5 notification to someone, and ATC is gonna drop 4 of them, and we did the right message. Okay, in this, and then how ATC decides that we can talk about later. But it's a ranking problem essentially. So we can't make up a message magically unless you tell us what that message is. Okay. But the second question you are asking is the channel agnosticity of the display. Okay, so I have message A, and then how that is being visualized on different channels. So ATC doesn't care about that and shouldn't care about it. For ATC, the message is an ID, or a set of IDs which are not free text, right? It's an IDs, and then ATC says, hey, send this ID, this message which is characterized by this ID on the notification channel. And then the notification system, when it is displayed to the user, there needs to be some logic implemented. So I send you a notification that, hi, Troy. Then maybe my ID is Troy, and I have a notification type, which is this. And then when it's displayed, the kind of formatting will happen in some code. Okay. In a notification tab. And we have a technology which can use the same code to use it for push or for email. This is a standardized use case. Now there are less standardized use cases when you need to implement this display logic in push email notification. Okay, so I just give you an example. The agnosticity, or ATC is agnostic to the display display channel.
Got it. Okay, so if you have a simple message, I would imagine this would be something like, Sandor just sent you an in-mail, right? Or something like that, right? I could pass that same message, right, to the kind of notification infrastructure. ATC would route that, and then the channel-specific systems that are responsible for actually delivering that message, they could all kind of look at that format that I created, and I create that once, and they would know how to render that to JavaScript and HTML for in-app, and send it down to Apple Push Notification Service or Google Firebase for FCM for mobile push, or wrap it in a big complex tables-based HTML for email?
Yeah. So the way it works that the source of truth and the domain knowledge lives with the team which uses the comms platform. Like we can't take over that. Like there are 50 or 80 teams at LinkedIn uses the comms platform. There's no way we can even attempt to understand the domain.
Got it.
So we are keeping our systems very domain agnostic. So in your case, the email content lives somewhere with the team who owns the whole email experience. Like it's just an ID message, and my user is just an ID. Like who is the receiver is an ID. The email message is an ID. So this is the information we are passing through our systems, right? And we don't attempt to reason about what is behind it. Okay. And then the logic which displays this, it's again as a plugin system, which lives with the owner team again. So we are kind of at the platform side, we are trying to stay out of the domain specific part, because one, we would require continuously grow our team with the number of use cases if we did that. And also it would blow up our code base. And again, we are kind of trying to keep the platform team lean, so we can scale with the use cases in a way that we don't scale linearly.
Got it. That makes sense. 50, 80 teams using the comms platform. That's remarkable. That's crazy. Would you mind, how big is the ATC team today? And then how big is the broader kind of Notify organization?
So the Notify organization is around 50.
Okay. Yep.
But within that, there is the kind of more product facing org, which is around 15, and around like 30, 35 is the platform. And the ATC team is actually, I don't know the current, it's 7, 8 people.
Got it. Okay.
And it has always been around this 6, 8. I think that's kind of the reason we were able to keep it in this level is exactly what I said, that kind of trying to stay lean and implement functionality which create leverage, and not to bloat ourselves up in the domain specific things.
That makes sense. And so does the broader Notify team or the ATC team, is there, how is the kind of future direction of that decided? Is there a product manager, or is it kind of more just coming from external inputs and requests from other parts of the LinkedIn organization?
So that there are product managers. Okay, so we have product management support as well as engineering. I mean, input coming from our own engineers, and we have input coming from users. I think it's very similar in every platform org, that kind of these are the your users is one of the input. There is an audience, like the members, and it's part of being a platform manager to assemble these to a meaningful roadmap, kind of prioritize in between these. Also, many times user, like they ask for faster horses, right? And then they don't ask for a car, and then you need to figure out from different clues that, hey, this is the functionality we need to build, and this will help like 5 to 10 users, and then kind of formulate that whole problem and make it exact.
Yeah, I know that makes sense. Is there, when I remember, so I read one of their articles right around the time that ATC was kind of publicly announced, and I thought that one of the things that was interesting is that during that, and I'm sure this was marketing, but maybe you know about this as well, that they mentioned that launching ATC cut member complaints in half, and that was interesting to me. And this is actually something I didn't necessarily expect when I started Courier, but I've learned a lot about from folks who have built internal systems like this. Is a lot of user complaints are about poorly implemented notifications. Is that kind of one of the key things that you guys are still looking at? Is that on the member side?
So I think there are multiple again layers here. When I talked about this briefly in the beginning, when each team tried to use their channels their own way, a lot of those complaints were coming from that word. So just by putting common patterns into place, which are kind of free of those risk conditions and individual choices, that definitely helped a lot. Okay. At this point, we are still cutting member complaints mostly through AI. Okay, just improving AI. There are always complaints about just things bugs. There are always bugs, but I don't think that is the major source anymore of the. But yeah, AI is the main kind of venue right now.
Yeah, and I think it seems like it's one of those things, which is, I think this is a good thing, where it's a bit of diminishing returns, but that's great because it's the impact is heavily upfront, right? And I know that I was talking to the notification scheme at Slack, and they similarly went through a phase where they implemented kind of a centralized notification infrastructure, and I think in their case now they're more like you guys have a lot of notifications, but like in many ways like notifications are kind of what drive their product entirely. I think they dropped kind of support by like 60% or something insane like that, just by kind of centralizing and making sure that there was governance.
Yeah, I think the big step function was definitely governance versus no governance, right? And once you have the governance in place, you have two benefits. One, you got rid of the systematic problems, right? You don't have that problem anymore where there are multiple teams think differently. But you also have a central choke point where you can act quickly. Okay, so that's another benefit. Like if you don't have a central team trying to engage like every team in the org and make them do something, that's very difficult. Now we have a central team. From that point, you have a choke point. Okay, you created a setup which is kind of self-repairing, or you can repair it easily, and then you can implement improvements on top of that. So I think,
The other kind of metric that was mentioned when ATC first launched is at the time there was it had created a double-digit increase in engagement. I would imagine that's something that's more of a constant effort, because that's also kind of a constantly changing landscape, right? Where the needs of kind of the market and what users expect and kind of what technology allows, that's constantly changing. Is that something that the team's looking at a lot, is where engagement rates are and making changes to try and push that back up? Or
so I mean, obviously that's part of the growth charter, but whenever you make a technology investment, like you get an upfront step function benefit, and then from that it becomes incremental, and then you again might want to think about step function. So I think what the double digit we are referring to was the step function gain we got. And then so I mean, we are part of the growth org, and as part of that we are continuously looking at improvement. There is always like change in the product, change in how users use the product, and of course we need to kind of keep up with changes. But that's true for every consumer product organization.
Although I think this is becoming, there's a lot of change happening right now, right? Obviously impacting social networks with things like the tracking changes, but in particular for notifications, right, a big change is coming up with iOS 15 with built-in digest, and obviously Google's making a bunch of changes on the Android ecosystem. Is that something that that your team or department stays on top of and thinks about? What's the impact? And
we are definitely staying on top of it. Our goal is like long-term sustainability of the LinkedIn ecosystem, so we are definitely going to make the right changes there. I don't have like the exact details of yet, but this is a kind of disruptive change which impacts, like it comes from time to time in this industry. And then the way we build kind of our system, again the channel agnosticity, again the central decision making, that so we are going to be able to kind of turn those knobs in a way that we are able to kind of handle this change.
That makes sense. Last question for me. We mentioned earlier that that the Notify organization sits within growth. At the same time, we've talked about things like AI, and I know that there's a lot of complex technology under the hood for distributed systems engineering. when you're hiring, when you're growing the team, what kind of engineers are you looking for? Is this kind of growth engineers? Is this distributed systems engineers? Do you have a little bit of everything?
So for the platform side, we are looking for like infrastructure, distributed systems engineers. That's kind of why we separated these orgs a bit. So so we understand like which type of engineers we want to hire. At this point, it became a very distributed systems due to complexity. Like before, it was more simple, but these days, like due to the scale again, the number of systems, it's a distributed systems a problem. We are also looking for engineers to work on the product side. So I mean, iOS, Android, web, that's all there, of course. So we are looking for a mixed bag of engineers. AI is a separate organization. They are also hiring, but yeah, they are looking for machine learning engineers. So it's kind of, there is a separation of specialization within the organization.
Very cool. Lots of opportunity to pitch in and help out. Well, awesome. Hey, Sandor, it was great to spend some time together again. Really interesting stuff. Is any kind of last thoughts from yourself or anything that we can help with here?
So maybe what kind of we discussed, that the advice for startups and how they should think about this problem space. So again, I don't advise someone in a 10 people startup to start to build ATC. Probably this everything we talked about is a large company problem and large scale problem, right? If as a startup, I would start from using some external service, whatever I find, and I wouldn't implement my own channel specific delivery. And then the company grows, I would kind of start to build out the decision making in my own. Although my advice is that at least have a dedicated person who handles all these requests and don't spread it out across the company, because then later on you will need to unify.
Yeah, to your point earlier, there's this step function increase at the beginning of the investment, right? And so the earlier you can grab that, the better. But you're not going to need the 50-person organization.
No, you don't. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Sandor. Really appreciate your time. And folks can find you on LinkedIn, of course. So we'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.